Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., that is endearingly called Chocolate City. All these other urban areas, or in New York and Harlem, all of these urban areas people moved to try to have better jobs in industrialized type of a country at this time. And as they moved there, they were hoping for a better life. And this is one of the primary reasons for moving from the South to the North. And when they went into these particular areas that became, as time went on, very much a part of urban problems. Economics became disastrous. This groups of people that migrated there came there with high hopes and in many instances prospered and did a lot better, but they had low-skilled types of jobs that they could finish a job and then go right out of that job and take on another one. So things were better. And I would also like to say during this time period of 1916 to say that first migration period to 1930, if we think about World War I and World War II, why there was a need there for people to build railroads because of the war, to build military equipment. So therefore industries evolved and there was a need for large numbers of people to work in those industries. So this workforce that moved there came there for those types of reasons. But on a more intellectual level, it is very interesting to understand because of that great migration, something by the name of the Harlem Renaissance emerged. And during this time period, you had people like Zora Neale Hurston, the great Duke Ellington, Count Basie, just many other literary scholars at that time, the great W.B. Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey, all of those people in this central area from that great migration emerged that really contributed to the American culture as well as the world culture. But now, given that, you had World War I, World War II, large concentrations of people moving from the South to the North, with an increase of millions by this time that have moved into urban areas. And after they got there and worked very hard, you find that discrimination was even there in the North, as they very much experienced sometimes in the South. People were disrespecting, weren't used to that group of people moving in, that group of people taking jobs that others felt that they should have. And when you think about today's political climate, some of the same issues are very much present with immigration of other people coming into the country, or with groups of people still competing for jobs and within the workforce. But this was a great migration that took place in that particular time period from 1916, say, to 1930, with large concentrations of African Americans moving. And then we can look at what we might refer to as a second wave of that same migration that went on from up until the 1960s through the 1970s. Again, with people moving from the South to the North in large population numbers. And that statistics just increased, and people were moving for a better way of life and to also to prosper and to move away from a very depressed, offensive, racist society
and the violent side at the time.
Yes.
Well, since we're into a voting season now, how did African Americans participate in the politics once they got out of the South? Make some statements.
Well, that's a very interesting concept because historically, Africans who had an opportunity to vote would have probably voted in the Republican Party at that particular time. But then there was a transition that took place, you know, after World War I, World War II, and things started to change, that people started to move toward a more democratic type of voting. And those types of possibilities as they move to the North lean in that direction. And I think that's why today you will find large numbers of people who are concentrated in urban areas will vote on the Democratic ticket because they feel that their policies will gear toward them more so than what a more conservative Republican Party would. So they actually were indeed the Democratic Party, but they were a force to be reckoned with, and people had to go in, and many people started to merge into education, become Congress people out of those urban areas, and very politically motivated in that urban setting. But going back to that whole notion of them moving there, we would like to try to say that when we look at the culture of those concentrated urban areas, a lot of deviance started to emerge. Why? Because the economics within those particular cities did not allow people to continue, as we moved into a technological age, to have the same jobs that they had when they went there in an earlier time period of 1916 to the 1930s, or why they went there in the 50s and 60s in large proportions. So now we see pockets of cultural poverty within those same urban settings that would be disproportionate of African Americans in that area. So education, economics, school systems, family breakup, all of those characteristics that would lead toward high crime rates are certainly characteristics of a large number of the urban areas. And then this become a very huge problem within the United States. So when we look at Chicago and look at other urban areas, we see homicide rates are so high. It's not that it's the people, but it's the social environment of living in the culture of poverty and those characteristics that it has manifested that will cause that to happen.
Okay, and we're going to take a short commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
In the South, because of the early migration, are now moving back to the South.
And in the meanwhile, say something about the system of separation and segregation.
Oh, yes,
in the South, it was clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's the law, Plessy versus Ferguson.
That's right.
But in the North, it was not always that that way, and how that might have contributed. The separation of only black folks here. And do something like
I hit that too.
Because I think that would sort of round out.
That's right.
This excellent information. You've got them there.
That's right.
And they're working, and they're going to war and everything else, and et cetera. But while they're there, everything is not equal in a real sense. And this is where the suffrage plays a very, very important part. And some of the things that we ought to be thinking about today.
That's right.
In terms of trying to deal with this politics. Okay, but that's essentially we'll have 10 minutes.
Okay,
so anything that you want to throw within the framework of making people understand the violence, brutality, et cetera, in the northern parts of it, sociologically.
Okay,
just throw it at us. You see.
Okay.
I'm trying to know that lady's name. It starts with an N. She did this tremendous study on Africans, the migration of black folks to the northern parts of the United States was on all of the. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. E. Kelly Sanford from Tennessee State University, and he's giving us some information in reference to Africans in the cities. And let's pick up where we left off, Dr. Sanford, and have you to talk about some aspects of separation and segregation and some of the other things that you like to deal with during this last 10 minutes of Africans in the cities.
Okay. Well, and as we look back historically and coming out of slavery with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, there were rules and regulations and actually laws that were put in place that were legal segregate people in the South. And this was very much a part of the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson that made everything legal to be separated. And we know out of slavery through Jim Crow laws for 81 years, things were separate with unwritten laws that made things segregated here in the South. So when people made that great migration to the northern areas, they really moved to try to have a certain freedom, opportunity, and as we mentioned in the last segment, job opportunities to work in industries. But as they got there and increasing numbers became, we make a distinction in sociology between overt type of racism and segregation, where laws are there to say that, and then covert. And those things that are overt are pretty much legalized. They are there, and you kind of know your position. But when it's covert, it's beneath the surface. It's not so much written in law. But people might still act in very prejudiced, racist, and discriminatory ways. So we can find that was starting to emerge in the northern cities. Although African Americans migrated and went into the urban areas, and they were pretty much concentrated in one area, if they would go out to get jobs eventually, they found a lot of discrimination. Or in many instances, they may have been discriminated against going into other areas to have upward mobility and housing. You can see even within this campaign, one of the presidential candidates discriminated against African Americans to live in their apartment complex. And so this type of racism and prejudice was very much a part of the North as well as in the South, but there was this subtle difference that was there. But it was indeed present, and it was discriminatory toward African Americans that treated them in such an inequitable way that it not allowed them to advance within that area as others could and live freely. But it was much better than living in the South. But there were still great problems that were there.
And so, and you often talk about the sociological impact in terms of how Africans lived and some of the struggles that they had to overcome. Talk in reference to some of those things.
Well, that's a peculiar institution going back from slavery all the way. It was horrible. Institutions that are so important were just broken up. People doing that first forced migration, of course, families were destroyed, laws saying that you can't learn, didn't have medical care, housing was awful. You know, if you watch any of the film that are out here today, 12 Years of Slave, which is kind of interesting just to bring that up, a person that had migrated to the North and was just doing his work and then got captured and pulled back into the South, and it was a person that was enslaved there, because there were free African Americans even during the earlier time periods before the Great Migration, and some even as early as say 1860 to 1870 went west. They were free African Americans, and some of those same free African Americans went to the North, but many went out west into the California area. But it was kind of an interesting phenomenon to see that they still had to experience this indifferent treatment. But that enslavement was just a horrible thing when you look at things that are going on today, because culture is defined as knowledge, customs, language, values that are passed down from one generation to the next generation. So if you think in terms of 244 years of enslavement, 81 years of Jim Crow laws that led into legal segregation, how could one group fare in an equal way or balanced way in a society that says you're supposed to have education, economic opportunity, but you have forced desegregation and racism that prevents that. And now those born in the 80s and 90s might feel that there's a sense of, oh, everything is just fine now. However, there's some still connections that are going on with what happened from 1619 to the present, within many of the environments and families that are present today. We still have a disproportionate amount of people in very high percentages the first time of graduating from high school and college. You know, first generation still today. Why? Because of the culture here in America and how it was founded. Alex de Tocqueville, for instance, he came here during the time of slavery and was quite surprised. He came here to look at our penal system. And when he came here to look at this prison system that they felt in comparison to the old world was much better, he was quite surprised because he saw people who were enslaved. Enslavement was still present. The old world had slavery going on, but they got out of it. But America was still doing it. And he felt that we would never reach a true democracy because of the very foundations, the pillars of our institutions were based on slavery. So he, in his book, Democracy in America, his central thesis is saying that we will never reach a true democracy because of how it was founded. How it started.
Very good. You know, in terms of trying to move toward that, we've got about 3 minutes.
Okay.
Let's say something in terms of the efforts that were made by Africans to improve themselves. You know, NAACP, the Urban League, and etc. They didn't go so very far, but at least it helped to stem some of the tides in reference to this discrimination. Speak to some of those.